Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
Myles Garrett wants to win, and he no longer believes that can happen with the Cleveland Browns. Also, Saquon Barkley is ready to spoil a three-peat, and Cooper Kupp is available.
I'm Peter Bukowski, starting your day with the can't-miss stories and biggest debates in sports. You're Locked On Sports Today.
Searching all major sports. Found.
Let's start with the biggest story.
With the big game around the corner, the biggest story in sports right now amongst the NFL might be in the city of Cleveland. Here to join us and break down the unprecedented Myles Garrett trade request is Spencer German, host of Locked On Browns. Spencer, what does a trade request like this mean for a team like the Cleveland Browns?
Yeah, so Ross, I think it starts with just the fact that I look back at 20 plus years of so much misery for this fan base and this franchise, and then the last 5 have kind of bring you some promise, and they get to the playoffs a couple times and all these different things, and this feels like since 1999 rock bottom for the organization, frankly, because at least there was a stretch there, as I'm sure everyone's aware, where the Browns went 1-31 in 2 years. There was 2016, 2017. Those were dark times here in Cleveland. But at least in that stretch of time, fans saw the light at the end of the tunnel. They knew there was a point to all this. It was like you're accumulating picks. You're drafting a guy like Myles Garrett in 2017, and then you're drafting Baker Mayfield and Denzel Ward in 2018, and you're sort of establishing this base of foundational players to lead you into this new frontier. And this is completely different. This is like, you had all that. You were the team that was supposed to be contending for titles, and now it all goes out the window if Myles Garrett truly ends up getting traded here, and you're going back to square one, which is the direction, by the way, I think the Browns have to go. I've been pretty adamant on the Locked On Browns podcast that I don't think you have to blow it up like in the NFL. I think there's ways to kind of maneuver things where you can sort of stay competitive and then still find a way to get up into the top 10 and draft a quarterback, especially if you trade back from 2 and maybe accumulate enough picks that you can trade up next year or something like that if you like next year's quarterback class better. We know that the quarterback is the position they need the most. That's the position every team covets. But I've kind of been pitching that. And now if Myles Garrett's out of the equation, if he's not part of this story, I think you have to just embrace the fact that this gives you some clarity on where you really are and who you really are, and you got to just go back to square one and start all over.
Yeah, the tricky part is embracing it, right? I mean, I'm here in the city of New Orleans, a team that has always refused to embrace exactly where they are, but they might not have a choice here soon, and maybe Cleveland Browns are in the same situation. Spencer, stop me if I'm connecting dots that don't need to be connected, but you listed off some foundational players and things like that, and I noticed a name that was missing. How much of what we're seeing right now with this whole situation with Myles Garrett, does the Deshaun Watson contract or situation or anything, does that have any bearing on getting the situation to this point?
I think the Deshaun Watson situation is like the key element of all of this. Like you can retrace the steps on what led us to today, or I guess on Monday, where Myles Garrett is submitting via some note to the NFL Network and all the big insiders out there that he wants to trade. It all goes back to 2022, the Browns making the trade for Deshaun Watson. And I've been on the record. I've said this on the show. I've said this other places. I don't blame the Browns for trying to upgrade the quarterback position when they did.
Sure.
But there was limitations to Baker Mayfield's game. There's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that people don't know about where he just wasn't really a fit in the locker room. People didn't really get along with him. There were some leadership qualities that they didn't necessarily think he had. And so there were some problems, some rifts within the organization that they felt they could not kind of build around him, and they didn't want to pay him the money they was going to take to pay him in a contract extension. So I don't blame them for trying to go out and upgrade the position. The problem is who they picked, and the problem is they signed up for a situation that should have, from the beginning, they should have known was untenable. They talked about how they vetted him, and they really did their research on how he can fit in Stefanski's offense, and that all these allegations that were against him weren't going to be a problem. I have it on pretty good authority that they also thought the suspension wasn't going to be 11 games that first year, and then it turned out to be 11 games, and you basically wasted that whole first year that he was even there. And for what? Like a guy who just, you can turn the 2020 highlights on and say that's the guy we thought we were getting. But there was a mental block there that he just clearly the last couple of years had shown he's not the same quarterback. And so it all starts with that decision. and it ripples into, everything we've seen transpire the last couple of years. The fact that the organization seemed like there was better vibes around the team when he wasn't around the last couple of years due to injury. They make the playoffs with the ghost of Joe Flacco, if you will, last year. And then this year they come out and they're 3-14, and he's kind of the key element of that, where they get up to a 1-6 start. So it all led to this. The Deshaun Watson thing, the ripples of that trade are going to sort of echo and pulse through this organization for years to come, because this truly, if Myles Garrett gets traded, it truly could set the organization back several years, if not up to another decade, before they really kind of get this thing back on track.
Yeah, and certainly no Cleveland Browns fan wants to see that. But let's go exactly there. You mentioned if Myles Garrett gets traded, what is your kind of barometer on this situation? How likely is it that this actually happens? We see all the time players request a trade and then they never go anywhere. What do you see kind of happening in the way that this situation might play out?
Yeah, so what's interesting about this, too, is there's some precedent for this with the Browns, because David Njoku in 2020, when this regime first took over, requested a trade, and they said no, and they worked it out. The difference is, and I actually talked about this on Locked On Browns on Monday, I kind of use the example of like when you're in a relationship, like in the early stages, if one person gets mad at the other and they're like, I'm done, I can't do this, and you break up after like a month, you can come back from that. I remember many toxic relationships from high school that of my friends who they kept getting back together over and over and over again, and they figured it out in the end. Like, okay, we'll get there. But at this point, like Myles Garrett and this brass, they have been together for 5 years now. 5 years of his 8 years, they've been together. And so it's a lot harder to put that back, put the lid back on it after you've now put, it's like if you're married and you then come out and say, like, you know what, I want a divorce. It's kind of hard to come back from that. Like, that's the last card you can play. So I don't think this is, I know there's been some speculation that maybe this is just a leverage play for a contract extension. I think that ship sailed when he sort of hinted at maybe playing somewhere else during the season. Yeah. This to me feels like an escalation where he's like, nope, this is it. I'm good. I don't want the plan anymore. I don't like the plan that you're laying out. I don't think this is something that can be fixed. And I want to go compete somewhere for Super Bowls. So it'll be interesting. It seems like there is going to be sort of a stalemate here. The organization's saying they're not going to trade him. We'll see. And I guess, if they throw $50 million a year at him, maybe that changes the story here. But right now, I'm of the belief that this does end with him getting traded.
You can stay up to date with all of the Myles Garrett drama and the Cleveland Browns by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Browns on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. You're Locked On Sports Today. Coming up, Saquon Barkley is ready to roll on the Chiefs. But first, the more details that emerge, the worse the Mavs look with the Luka trade. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities, and there is no better way to make every play more exciting than with the FanDuel Sportsbook app. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy for you to get in on the action. And with live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. Live betting feature will also allow you to stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, well, that's just icing on the cake. And one bet that you could look at with that $5 could be on the NBA tonight. Let's check it out. The Indiana Pacers continue a westward road trip to face the Portland Trailblazers, and are favored. FanDuel likes the Pacers by 5 points. The Pacers are on a bit of a heater, so maybe they can keep up that momentum. Download the app or head over to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you could score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. Doncic's father, Sasha, is appalled by the way that the Dallas Mavericks handled the trade that sent Luka Doncic to the Los Angeles Lakers. He said that it was all done in secret and with no regard for his son. Reports also state that Luka recently purchased a $15 million house in Dallas as well. No matter how you slice it, Nico Harrison has made a huge gamble that he may or may not have had to make in the first place.
And the next bet on Luka's career came from the Dallas Mavericks of saying, you know what, we're going to give this draft pick next year in 2019 to move up 2 spots and to select Luka Doncic, because Dallas had been scouting him forever. This was the guy they always wanted. This was the guy that they tanked for. This was the guy they always had at number one on their board. When you think about the previous regime and Tony Ronzoni and Donnie Nelson and those guys in that front office, they had zeroed in on Luka Doncic and said, "We want Luka," and they placed the bet that Luka was going to be the next generational talent in the NBA, and that he was going to be the next face of the franchise to take the baton from Dirk in Dallas. And it panned out for a while, right? We were in the seventh season of Luka's career, and Dallas decided to place another bet on Luka's career. They didn't decide to double down. They didn't decide to triple down. They went back to the table and said, "Hey, we're going to place a new bet on the table. And this is going to be a bet on the table that Luka's never going to reach his full potential." And that's one of the biggest bets in sports history, man.
The Wolves get a look at the new look Kings on Monday.
All right, so Wolves coming into this one off that dumb loss, let's just call it what it was, to Washington at home. That was Saturday night. They get Ant back, though, which you would think would move the needle enough tonight. But DeMar DeRozan, man, must have had like the fountain of youth in his Gatorade bottle on the bench, because he was just on fire. 33 points, team high for the Kings. Wolves trailed most of this one, but they did tie it back up at 77 apiece. Then things just kind of fell apart in the fourth quarter. Never found that spark when they needed one the most. They end up losing, don't even get off a potential game-tying three-pointer at the end with 4 seconds left. Final score, 114-111.
And in offseason baseball news, a highly regarded umpire has been fired for connections to gambling. Pat Hoberg was fired for, quote, sharing legal sports betting accounts with a friend who bet on baseball, and for intentionally deleting messages key into the investigation into his conduct. MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred confirmed that there is no evidence that Hoberg ended up actually betting on any games, nor did he end up influencing any games because of certain wagers. Ironically, though, Hoberg is considered one of the best umpires in the league. In its statement, MLB said that it fired Hoberg for failing to, quote, uphold the integrity of the game, and that he, quote, should have known that his friend, a professional poker player, had bet on baseball from the shared account. All right, coming at you from Super Bowl Radio Row here in the, I'm going to say great city of New Orleans, Louisiana. It is my hometown, after all. We are joined here by Locked On Eagles host Louis DiBiase. Louis, you're going to be watching these Philadelphia Eagles competing for a Super Bowl ring, let's say again, up against the Kansas City Chiefs. Let's start with Saquon Barkley, who's been a humongous story this season, an MVP-like season, but unfortunately the MVP is a quarterback award, and we all know that, but we know Saquon deserves it. What's the expectation for kind of the reliance on Saquon Barkley and looking at how that sets up against these Kansas City Chiefs?
I think the expectation is going to be what it's been all year. He's going to have to carry the offense. I think he's going to touch the football over 20 times, and in 2024, it's unbelievable that a running back could be the reason a three-peat is stopped.
Yeah.
Going up against one of the greatest quarterback and head coach combos in NFL history.
Yeah.
But that is the expectation. And it's something the Eagles didn't have in Super Bowl 57. Miles Sanders was not that guy in that game. I think it was a big reason they lost in the second half. Time of possession was a big thing. So Saquon Barkley is an element to this game that was not there 2 years ago. So I think he's the main part of it.
What's made him so good this season? Like, is it the system? Is it him? Is he mad at the Giants? Like, what is it that's working for him?
I think it's the perfect combination of a generational player at this position, a generational offensive line coach, a selfless quarterback, and one of the best offensive lines that I've ever seen. It really is just a beautiful, perfect combination. It's why Howie Roseman finally paid a running back in free agency. He's never done this before, and I think he just understood it's the right player at the right time.
Yeah, absolutely. He's done a great job behind that selfless quarterback that you mentioned. Jalen Hurts, somebody that has kind of been in and out of the elite quarterback conversations, depending upon who you're talking to, but how much does a Super Bowl win further his legacy?
I think he's going to start getting into a conversation. I think people actually have to have this conversation where he's not an all-time great, but Hall of Fame case, if he has a ring, considering his all-time win percentage, it's up there with the likes of Tom Brady, Peyton Manning. You know, he's already one of the best dual threat quarterbacks we've ever seen. He's going to eventually break Cam Newton's rushing touchdown record. He has the single season touchdown record. He's been to 2 Super Bowls. He's got playoff wins. He's only 26 years old. The conversation's got to switch from what right now is a system quarterback to potentially a future Hall of Fame quarterback. I don't know if everyone's going to have that conversation, but the real ones will. I think it's a correct take to have if he pulls this off.
The real ones will. I like that. I also got just kind of rocked by the idea that he's 26 years old. Kind of crazy. But hey, look, we're all at the Super Bowl, all right? We're all doing good. You mentioned a little bit about Jalen and sort of, the system quarterback conversation. He's in an offense right now where he was, I think it's the 3rd fewest passes thrown amongst the league, while it's the 2nd most, or if not the most rushes. Does the lack of passing attempts really just come down to how successful the rushing offense has been, or is that just something that you expect to see with Jalen?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think he did prove in 2022 and 2023 he can be a reason you win. You win because of Jalen Hurts throwing 30-plus times. More than halfway through the year last year, he was an MVP betting favorite,
right?
And he was carrying the offense. The run game with DeAndre Swift was kind of inconsistent. So a lot of it was Jalen and the offense just realizing we have a generational combination of an offensive line and a running back. So he took the Robin role instead of the Batman. But at the same time, I think we have to come to terms that Jalen Hurts is elite in a different way than a Joe Burrow or Josh Allen, where he's not an elite processor in the pocket. He's an elite passer outside the numbers, outside of structure, throwing the deep ball. Very Russell Wilson-like. He's not Tom Brady or Peyton Manning. So I think you just have to accept with Jalen that he's a different form of elite quarterback.
Yeah.
So I think it is a combination of both, of just who he is, and then you just have one of the greatest running backs of all time on your team.
Yeah, a quarterback who can succeed without volume. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. We know Saquon Barkley is elite. We're seeing Jalen Hurts step into elite conversation. What's the temperature on Nick Sirianni now?
I do truthfully believe, and I don't think this is fair, but I don't know if this win would help Nick Sirianni's legacy. I think the conversation is still going to remain. He doesn't call plays, which I think a lot of the NFL believes that's what makes a great head coach. I think people think he's carried by his coordinators, his general manager, an unworldly talented roster. I believe Nick Sirianni deserves more credit than that. I think what he does well is kind of unquantifiable from a film perspective, from a stat perspective. But I think because that you can't really put, you can't calculate culture and, being a leader, I still think he might not get enough credit even after this ring, despite him doing things in 4 years that only a few coaches have ever done.
You can stay up to date all year on the Philadelphia Eagles by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Eagles on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Coming up, Cooper Kupp is available. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of my favorite memories was attending a concert last year. The energy and excitement were unforgettable. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out all the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats so that you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands and thousands of tickets. Curation makes it so much easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. You can take all the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Wide receivers seem to always be on the move every offseason, and this year, one of the big names might be Cooper Kupp of the Los Angeles Rams. Here to break down the potential move of Cooper Kupp is Doug McCain, co-host from over at Locked On Rams. You can find every single Monday through Friday. Doug, when you take a look at this kind of post this message from Cooper Kupp about a potential trade or him potentially heading elsewhere, what do you think it kind of takes to get to this point? Like what was it that built to this point for Cooper Kupp and the Rams that there could be kind of a, for lack of a better phrase, divorce happening here?
Well, first and foremost, I think that a lot of Rams fans, a lot of people that cover this team knew that this was going to be the likely scenario that it was going to come to this. And how we got to this was because when they gave him that $80+ million extension after his Triple Crown season, he was Super Kupp. He has not been that in the 3 years since. I mean, he had 1,947 yards that season. 3 years since, in 22 had 812 yards, 23 737 yards, and last year 710 receiving yards. So you basically have a guy that has not been as productive on the field. And also, he's missed a lot of games. He's missed at least 5 games the last 2 seasons combined. And then you combine that with the fact that he's on the hook the Rams are on the hook for a $29 million cap hit. I mean, he's just not worth that. I mean, that's more than T. Higgins is probably going to get on the open market from an AAV standpoint. So it's based on the level of production. It's based on the health, and he's just not the guy that he was.
Yeah. What do you make of the way that this was kind of presented? It's a little bit of like a notes app situation posted on social media.
I just think that, look, I mean, Cooper Kupp is someone who's always really had a great ability to connect with this fan base through his social media. So from this standpoint, it doesn't surprise me too much, but it was kind of the words that he used. I mean, the fact that he doesn't agree with his decision. He said that in the very first paragraph. He believed that he was going to begin and end his career in LA. And unfortunately, the Rams have made it clear, and they did at the deadline last year when his name was being shopped. They were interested in moving him. They wanted a second-round pick for him then. That was never going to happen. And you look at the financials of it, it just was unfeasible. But yeah, I mean, the optics of this, look, it's not pretty. Having said that, look, Torrey Holt didn't end his career with the Rams. He ended with Jacksonville. Isaac Bruce, it's nightmare fuel to think of him in a San Francisco 49ers uniform. And it happens in this sport. It usually doesn't end pretty. Most guys don't retire after 10 years like Aaron Donald did and just ride off to the sunset. But unfortunately, this is the situation we're in. And look, the Rams also made it clear last draft. I mean, there was some talk they were interested in drafting Rome Odunze, maybe trading up for him. There were some whispers about maybe pursuing Mike Evans. So I think really, if you want to feel better about this as a Rams fan, it's that, look, he thinks he can have elite seasons with another team. We'll see if that happens. But the truth is, another receiver to pair with Puka Nacua that gives you more of an explosive dynamic. I mean, his yards per catch went down. I mean, only 28 first downs. All these metrics that just show a lack of explosion. It's a little redundancy there with him and Puka Nacua. And you know that meme, Ross, where it's the guy who's walking down the street and
I knew it.
He's holding hands with this girl and he's looking back and that's the other girl. That was Sean McVay and Puka Nacua, and Cooper Kupp was the guy walking back. That's how it's been for the last couple of years. So the second they hit on Puka and he had the success that he had, the writing was kind of on the wall. And unfortunately, it's a situation that he's in. It's not be pretty, but he's going to be a Ram for life and he'll never buy a drink in this town.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. I mean, look, just because a guy ends up parting ways with an organization certainly doesn't mean that there's love lost when it comes to the fan base, especially somebody that's had such a major impact like a Cooper Kupp. When you look at the situation here as this all rolls along, it sounds like you're pretty resolved that this trade is going to happen. It certainly sounds like Cooper Kupp believes that this trade is going to happen. So you don't anticipate that this is just another one of those situations where everyone talks trade, nothing gets done. Like, this should get done.
This will 100% get done, especially at this point. I think you're at the point of no return, him going to social media like that. I don't expect the Rams to get anything more than a day 3 pick. Also would anticipate that most likely they'll be paying down some of that contract potentially as well. I mean, it doesn't happen very often to completely rework your deal. But last season, Joe Noteboom, he did rework his deal with the Rams that made it more incentive laden. Unfortunately, the injuries, he wasn't able to capitalize on that. I don't anticipate that at this point. I think the Rams have made it clear. I think Cooper Kupp has made it clear that they're going to definitely part ways, and that's just what's going to happen.
You can stay up to date all year long on the Los Angeles Rams by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Rams on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell tried to quell any notion of favoritism with the officials and the Kansas City Chiefs. Goodell said, quote, "I think that it reflects the fans' passion. And I think that it also is a reminder to us how important officiating is. And I think the men and women that officiate the NFL are outstanding. They have the highest possible standards." Good try, Raj. Good try. If you're catching this episode after hearing your favorite Locked On show, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Also, if you're a subscriber to Locked On Sports Today, we're here for you with the biggest stories in sports every day. Coming up, what's the biggest factor that will seal the Kansas City Chiefs three-peat? So at least until tomorrow, stay locked on sports today.
Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
Go to our video on demand. Click on sports at the top of your screen. There, you'll find past episodes of Locked On Sports Today, plus other Locked On shows on demand.